Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dane County Podcast. I'm Dane County Executive Joe Parisi, and today I have two special guests with me for a topic I think people are going to find very interesting and inspiring. With me today is Scott Williams, the owner of Garden to Be. Scott Williams is a local grower and aggregator, and Michelle Orgy, President and CEO of Second Harvest Foodbank. And Scott and Michelle have been incredible partners with Dane County over the past few years. Beginning really, we've had partnerships, but the partnership began in earnest with the onset of the pandemic. So Michelle and Scott, thank you both so much for taking some time out to be with us here today. We really appreciate it. I think I'll start with, before we get into, what we've all been experiencing in the new partnerships over the last few years, maybe I'll ask each of you to give folks just kind of an overview of what you do in the organizations you're with, kind of how you fit into the community. Michelle, would you like to start?
Thanks. Thank you for including me in this conversation. We certainly aren't the only folks who work with food in the community, but we're a pretty big one. We're behind the scenes. We work in 16 counties in southwestern Wisconsin, and certainly the most activity that we have is in Dane County as one of our 16 counties. About 60% of the food that we distribute is within Dane County. We are a food bank, and that means that we gather food from multiple sources, from farmers, from farms, from grocery stores, from distributors, from manufacturers, from just multiple sources. And we're a bit of a clearinghouse where we bring all of that back to our distribution center, or we make arrangements for our partners to connect with some of those donors directly. We reconfigure it, we inspect it, we repackage it, we then match make it to hundreds of partner agencies throughout our service area in southwestern Wisconsin. A lot of that is perishable, and I think folks think that for a food bank that we're often a warehouse full of canned goods, and we aren't. We have more than 65% of our food that we distribute is in categories that are considered foods to encourage: milk, eggs, other dairy products, produce. We really focus on getting that great food out there. We also do food share outreach, which is SNAP benefits. We have programs, mobile pantries, school markets, and other programs. But our main focus is connecting food to partner agencies that are nonprofits that really connect that food to folks who are experiencing food insecurity all throughout our service area, and that happens year round.
So when folks are probably more familiar with their local food pantries, and you would be one of the major sources that a lot of those food pantries source their food from.
Yes. So we are the often behind the scenes supplier, connector, supporter. We help with some capacity sometimes, and often food and food resources. Any food that we can provide at no cost to our partner agencies is our resources they can redeploy to their missions and root causes that get at the heart of food insecurity.
That's great. Well, thank you, Michelle. Scott, would you share with our listeners and viewers a little bit about what you do, and maybe I think it's kind of interesting how what you do has kind of evolved over the years too.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is great. So I started Garden to Be 23 years ago as a small mixed vegetable farm on about 7 acres. And I did have a CSA membership and worked with local restaurants and several daily farmers markets. But over the years, I gradually added in working with other Wisconsin farms to increase the product availability that I had to all of my customers. And they're all Wisconsin farms, not all in Dane County, but all of us. Dane County is a primary outlet for, where we find our support, where our business is. And now I work with over 24 farms. I don't do a CS anymore. I still have a couple of greenhouses that I operate year round. But I really enjoy the aggregation distribution aspect, because I was noticing so many of my friends, other farmers, that we will go to a lot of the same customers, not so much in a competitive sense, but we're bringing a small amount. We're all driving around. We're all doing all the things. And for anybody else that runs a small business, you have a lot of hats to wear, and it's a lot. And so I've enjoyed scaling down the wide margin of what I was doing as, a sole proprietor, doing all of these things, to now really focusing on the working with the relationships with the farmers and our customers, bringing in a wide variety of stuff, and being able to provide all this really high quality, nutritious food to so many different outlets. Now we don't work with just restaurants anymore. We work with other businesses that have professional kitchens. We work with school districts, and more recently, over the last 3 years, with Michelle's organization, Second Harvest, and directly with a bunch of the agencies here in Dane County.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I see. I mean, 23 years, and it seems like we've seen a growing appreciation and interest in local foods and working with local growers in the past couple of decades. What kind of changes have you seen since you first began in this business?
Absolutely. 23 years ago, there were, several farmers markets, but each one of them has grown quite a bit, and there are a lot more options now. Then there were, a handful of restaurants that were really dedicated to purchasing from local growers. And, several of those went and did it directly at farmers markets. Very few were doing what I started doing and going direct, back door, in the kitchen and making deliveries, taking orders. But now there's, the list of restaurants that, that our list of products goes out to is more than 50. And it's really hard in this city, I think, to not support locally grown products, not have them on your menu. The customer, I think their customers have also really encouraged them to do that too. They want to know that their food is grown closer to home. And I think the thing we found over the past couple of years is that with, supply chain issues in every aspect of life, food is another one of those. And so the closer to home you can get food, the more reliable it's going to be. It's something that me and all the farmers I work with, it's an emphasis on how we approach life. We think if we can grow it here, this is the way we should be eating. It helps us eat more seasonally. And it's just, it's a more sustainable way to approach food in this part of the world.
And, when we look at sustainability, resiliency, you mentioned supply chain issues, Scott, one of the reasons that we are here today to talk a little bit is to talk about the fact that fate intervened in 2020 and really changed the way that all of us live and lived. Every one of us were impacted in numerous ways, some the same, some differently. But both of your organizations and the folks you work with were impacted greatly, I think, just in the supply chain, area, both coming in and going out, right? Everything changed in 2020. And Michelle, could you maybe talk a little bit about the onset of the pandemic, what that meant, kind of what the experience for Second Harvest in local pantries, was growing out of that, both in supply, demand, et cetera?
We, as everyone else was at the time, didn't know what was around the corner. We didn't know what was going to be needed. We didn't know how long it was going to last. We didn't know if this was short-term, long-term. We had to make some decisions. We're a sometimes I refer to it as a big ship, and a big ship doesn't turn fast. And so if we were going to make some decisions, we needed to think about those with at least a few days notice, which for us is pretty swift. We're agile, we're flexible, but we are a pretty big operation. As we were thinking about how to do no contact deliveries or distributions, we had to make the decision. We're either going to switch everything to pre-boxed or stay with what we were doing. We couldn't do a hybrid model at that time, because to go pre-boxed was going to be to turn our whole distribution center, all of our work into a whole new way of doing things, socially distanced, pre-boxed. Just it was a a big commitment. So we talked with our partners and said we're moving to pre-box, and I think some of them were saying, "Wait, we're not that can't." It was a big surprise, and then a few days later, folks were like, "Yeah, we're glad we went pre-box because everything turned to no contact distribution." And something that was lost with that was the choice model, which we really encourage at our partners, and our partners really love to do that as well, because the dignity of folks being able to come into a partner agency and choose what they want is important. And we're now getting back to that model again. It's taken a while, but when folks can't go into a building, we decided to create variety boxes. So it was almost like a CSA box for folks using this produce. So we couldn't get food. We were competing with grocery stores. You saw grocery stores. There was the shelves were empty. We had to pay 3 times as much as we normally would for certain truckloads of food. We had to wire like a deposit to a supplier to get a truckload of peanut butter. And our bank called us and they said, Is this real? Are you I said, yes, we really do need to wire a deposit to secure a truckload of peanut butter that we're not even going to get for 6 to 8 weeks because they haven't even made the peanut butter yet. And it was wild. And so when this opportunity came up, we said we have to do it. It was getting local, fresh produce, and it was something that we needed and our community needed. But throughout the pandemic, we've just adjusted and flexed, and we increased our mobile pantries. At one point in Dane County, we had 98 or 100 mobile pantries operating, and to meet the increased need. That's kind of gone back to where we were pre-pandemic again. And but it was a lot of folks just waiting to go back to where we were before. And after a few months, we just committed to saying, we're not going back to where we were before. We're just moving ahead, and eventually just came to terms with this may be with us for a long time or forever in some form or another. And we're just going to incorporate the pandemic and all that comes with it into our work. So it was exhausting and unpredictable beyond what food banking already was. And it wasn't just an increase in volume, because that's something we might have been able to just say, okay, it's more of the same. It was a whole new way of operating, and folks were scared. Folks didn't know, they were concerned for their health and their well-being, and it was a tough time.
So more need, less supply, and I would assume fewer volunteers too, because of the challenges, especially for people with underlying conditions or who are older, not being comfortable, coming into an area where there are a lot of people around. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Scott, how about, thank you, Michelle. Scott, how about you from yours? And what was the initial kind of impact of the pandemic when it came in and things shut down? What was your operation and other growers' operations like, and how were they impacted by that?
So farmers, we get into this with a little bit of a sense of, well, you don't know what's going to happen. We're beholden to the weather and all kinds of factors, mm-hmm. but nothing really, anything like this, And so that middle of March, I remember when I'd made my last deliveries to restaurants. I had gone to the indoor farmers market. At that time, it was inside at the Garver Center, which was just amazing. It was our first year there, and it was really taking off, and I loved it. I was going every week, and by the end of the weekend, restaurants were closing, and we weren't going to be able to have an indoor farmers market. It was scary. We all had greenhouses full of plants. We had already purchased seed to plant based on plans that we had made the fall and winter previously, and we didn't know who our customers were going to be. We didn't know what we were going to do. Should we even continue to plant? It's a little bit unnerving. And so I feel like the the managers at the time for the Dane County Farmers Market, Sarah and Assistant Manager Jill, they were really phenomenal. And within a couple of weeks, we had, another option for a drive-through farmers market. Even though it was cold, we were outside and we did pre-orders and it worked. But even a couple of weeks after that, I had my first conversation with some people from Michelle's team who approached me about this box, and immediately I realized this was something that was going to work because, as growers, we're getting into this to grow food, to provide an essential basic need for people. It's what we do. It's our occupation, our lives. It's more than just a 9-to-5 job. It's a lifestyle too. And so the opportunity to do something where a lot of our hearts were at, but we never found ways beyond just the occasional donation when we had extra produce, but to be able to provide to a program like this just felt like an immediate right connection, because we have costs, we have employees, and it's not that we can just change our prices to be able to sell to whatever customers can afford. We're trying to make a sustainable business model. And so those first couple of meetings, I learned how to use Zoom and felt just immediately relief that there was going to be something that was going to work. I could see a long-term potential for it too. It's been great. It really has.
Good. And so Michelle was facing what she described. The growers are facing complete uncertainty. Restaurants are closing down. Everything's changing in CSA world, et cetera. And so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, even grocery stores, though you heard about things selling out, demand was up. Well, they were having a hard time getting deliveries. They could only limit the number of people coming through. We all remember it, right? So grocery store sales weren't skyrocketing because they were doing so much business. They had to limit how many people were coming through the building at a time. And they might be, limiting how many employees they could have at the same time. Their hours were changing. And so, even places where you would think like, well, everybody needs to eat, it was difficult to find a way to get food from where we were growing it to people that were eating it.
And so this was the environment in which our Farms to Foodbank program was born. And this was when the county came up with $9 million to inject into the food system around this marriage between local farmers, local growers, and Second Harvest and your partners, through which we kind of changed the supply chain a little bit. We built in resiliency. We created more connectivity between local growers and local food banks and food pantries by creating and providing that stability that you talked about, Scott, because I remember some early conversations and you guys saying, we need to know months in advance because we're going to plant, for the entire year. And so a lot of planning, a lot of work went into this behind the scenes. You guys, your staff, a lot of county staff coming together and planning this out. And what began as a concept turned into this program now, through which these supply chains, these connections have been made. A growing amount of locally grown food is being distributed in food pantries. And, we're to the point now where, we thought, as it did everyone, that after the pandemic, whenever that is technically, things would get better in food world, right? And in a number of ways, in a lot of places, things are back closer to normal, yet forever different, right? But unfortunately, as we're coming out of the pandemic, everyone knows all too well, we have a lot of geopolitical uncertainty going on right now that's impacting supply chains. We have inflation that is resulting in needs skyrocketing. Michelle was saying earlier when we were talking that their demand is about what it was during the peak of the pandemic, and even some local pantries have told me that their demand is now exceeding what it was during the pandemic because people are just having a hard time affording food. So the county was able to, this year in 2022, put forward another $2 million in emergency funds to extend the program. And in my 2023 budget, I have another $6 million to take us, through 23 because this hasn't let up yet. And I think that without this model, this built-in resiliency that's strengthening these food chains, and and Michelle and Scott, we were talking earlier a little bit about that kind of tension, for a food bank like Michelle's, to get the most food for the dollar. But I mean, what we're learning is we want the most nutrition for the dollar, right? And there's a lot to be said for local resiliency and building these local supply chains that we know won't fall apart based on what's going on in the rest of the world. So maybe could we talk a little bit about, maybe give some folks, Michelle or Scott, kind of, maybe Michelle, kind of what this partnership, when everyone was brought together, Second Harvest, the local growers, kind of how that unfolded and how that has changed the model and what you're able to do now with food and with local growers.
We're a nonprofit, and we aim to be, and we are very efficient and effective with folks' dollars and resources and donations, and yet we do need to spend money on food sometimes. During the pandemic, need increased by 60%, and at times, it was high, but that was about the average increase during the pandemic for us was about 60% of food insecurity increase, and donations were down. There was just less food less surplus food, which is before the pandemic we had about 80% of our food came in through donations, 20% was purchased for things that we couldn't get through donations. We're at about 65% donated now, and it's because of the way that the supply chain has changed. But so we're facing lower donations in food, increased need, and we needed to find a way to purchase to fill that gap, a bigger gap even. And we as a nonprofit we want to do the right thing, and when we're spending dollars, we want to have them go as far as possible, but we also want to spend them with integrity. And when we can spend those dollars and support local businesses and support local farmers, that is something that is really valuable to us as well. We're a part of this community, and we when this opportunity came up, this is the type of program that you really dream of being able to do. When somebody gives you money and says, we want you to support farmers, we want you to pay them a fair price for the food that they work hard to grow, that's something that we said, yes, we want to make this work. There are challenges, though, for a food bank to work with farmers at the scale that we're looking at here. And that's why working with Scott is really helpful. We work with larger farmers, but Scott works with some smaller farmers. I mean, if we were trying to get 3 cases from this farmer, 12 cases from that farmer, 15 from this other farmer, it's, we're pretty agile with how we wrangle our food sourcing. But Scott and Garden to Be, he gets all that and figures it all out, and then he's like, here's your 400 cases of whatever you ordered versus here's the 25 farmers to get this 400 cases together. So he aggregates that and helps us to be able to keep that efficiency level of things that we're doing, because we're that big ship. We're precise, and we do a lot of we do work with individual programs and we're I'm not saying we're bureaucratic, but we do have to operate at scale. And so Scott helped us with that.
And all the layers of it. I mean, your warehouse seems large, in a lot of ways, but once you see how many trucks are coming in and out of there, it's, you're using every one of those docks, and you only have so much square footage. So you can't have, 30 different farms showing up on all these days, bringing whatever it is. There has to be some efficiency to bring it together to make it work.
Yeah, that's what strikes me. I mean, the concept is really kind of simple and straightforward, right? Let's connect local growers with people in need through our food bank and food pantries. Simple concept, but the logistics in making that happen are monumental. And the work that you all and the other partners have put into this, as someone who sees what goes on behind the scenes, is just kind of mind-boggling and so incredibly impressive. And the results are so wonderful that people are getting this fresh, local, nutritious food that everyone deserves to have. And, folks, in your position, Scott, again, are able to do exactly what motivates you and inspires you to do the work you do, is you get fresh, nutritious food to people in need. Scott, what is this program like? We talked a little bit about how your world changed at the onset of the pandemic. So supply chains start falling apart, uncertainty really at one of the most critical times, right? Right when you're about to start planting for the year.
Yeah.
What was the impact then once this partnership was formed, and what was that journey like for you?
It was fantastic. I mean, I'd already been doing this aggregation distribution portion of Garden to Be, and it had been growing steadily for sure, with about, seven different farms. But, I immediately reached out to them, all of my regular vendors, and then, and friends of mine. And then I got to go out and meet other people at the Dane County Farmers Market I had never met before. Somehow I had never met Heather and Tom Bant at Green Barn Farm. I'd never talked with them before, and they're fantastic. And some farms that I knew from CSA days, 20 years ago, that our paths hadn't really been crossing recently. So I really liked being able to go out and reconnect with people, meet new people, and and a really enjoyable part for me is all those communications, the relationships that I get to be a part of. I enjoy it. I like all the paperwork and the math involved and trying to figure that out. And so those logistics have been great. It's grown even more in the last 3 years now. But like Michelle was saying, it's really great to know that every one of those growers had some reliability and things that they knew if they had to move, they could call me, and I would figure out ways to help do what they needed done, regardless of the scale they were working at. I work with some really small farms and some really large ones for our area. So it's great that it's been effective, I think, in reaching every one of them.
Scott, one of the things I like to do, and Michelle, is when evaluating a program or an initiative, is kind of look at it like, what if this wouldn't have come together? What if this program hadn't existed? From a grower perspective, Scott, how would the experience have been different, and maybe some of the impacts, if any, in the grower community had this program not been able to come together?
Yeah, significantly different for everybody involved. My farm would have continued to operate in some ways the way it was, trying to work with and support our restaurant customers and friends, because they were really struggling. Personally, I would have really had to learn how to do more of the direct marketing online stuff. I mean, there's so many now of the online stores where farms are doing not just CSA, but pick and choose purchasing models. And I might have explored some of that. I might have tried to join several other farmers markets once that got up, in order to re-establish like just direct sales to people.
Do you have any thoughts, Michelle, kind of how your world would have looked without this program?
We're a member of the national network Feeding America, and every couple of weeks, Feeding America during the pandemic, they do it now monthly. They ask a question. They would ask us a question: how many of your partner agencies had to close? And we always answered 0. And we had none of our partner agencies that had to close. And I'm not sure if it's because of this program, but all around the country, so many food banks had partner agencies that had to close. Our ability to provide this consistent, reliable way of getting food to folks, where a lot of partner agencies were closing because they didn't have volunteers. Our ability to pre-pack these boxes and get them out to folks meant that their lack of volunteers helped, because volunteers had to stay home. It was still so tough on our partners to do the work they did, and they they were amazing. They still are amazing. They've always been amazing, but they really had to do some fantastic additional. I can't even describe what they had to do, but these boxes I really were a resource to help them think about one less thing in the logistical gymnastics that they had to pull off during the pandemic. And when I think about, there were so many folks who had never thought of needing to look for food support before the pandemic hit. Folks who now are navigating a very welcoming and friendly but unfamiliar brand new system of finding food support, and at a time where things are already so uncertain, unpredictable, scary, and then adding on the uncertainty of having enough food, having enough nutritious food for your family and for yourself. If we didn't have this partnership, we wouldn't have been able to provide consistent, reliable food of these types. And it's not just produce. I mean, we're working with Scott and Garden to Be and a lot of farmers. We also are working with a lot of dairy farmers and meat producers, and we had a lot of other categories of food as well. So when we say, local producers, it's produce, it's dairy, it's meat, it's so many different categories. And when we were able to provide this consistent, reliable food supply to our partner agencies, folks could rely on them to go to their sites and get food. And this consistent, trusted, reliable source of food was so important to folks, and at a time where so many other things were up in the air. So I think without this partnership, we had other supplies of food, and we would have done okay, but we would not have been able to likely handle that additional surge of folks and do it with such reliable, consistent, trusted success.
I'm glad you said all that, Michelle, and it did make me realize that I stumbled a bit on that answer, but I remembered a moment at one of those drive-through markets early on, and before I'd even had one of these meetings where a friend of mine, another vendor, we were all driving away, and she pulled up and put her window down, and I could just, she was so distraught because she had greenhouses full of cucumbers that she had planted in the dead of winter in order to have them for these farmers markets, for restaurants that she sold to her customers. And what was she going to do? The amount of money that she already put in. I mean, we would have lost more farms for sure. There would have been farms that without this might not have made it through, or might have just had to choose some other way to go forward. And I mean, it really did have that big of an impact on some of us.
Thanks, Scott. So one day we will be past crisis stage. The challenging times have lasted a little longer than we'd hoped, but everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And once we are past the challenges that we're facing now, do either of you or both of you get the sense that this model is in some ways changed forever? I mean, will we ever go back to business as usual as far as your relationships with one another, or has something fundamentally changed?
I hope things have fundamentally changed, and not just for our relationship. I really appreciate this one, but I think it's vital that we, as this whole community, that we pay closer attention to where our food comes from, that we're eating more seasonally and locally. We're in an amazing spot where we have, water, regular access to pretty, a pretty good supply of water. We get rain, we have good fertile ground. It's just a way more sustainable approach to food procurement for people to buy closer to home. And I hope that is something that, through all the changes that have happened, through all the difficulties people have had in getting things, that this isn't just a blip that we're using in a short term, but that, we recognize how important it is that we have, skilled professional, growers who know how to grow healthy food and take good care of our land so that we can continue to do this for, generations. And we're doing it. And I really, really do appreciate all the work that these farmers have done, that we've all done together to show that, we might be small farms, but we're capable of providing a lot of food. Garden to Be has distributed more than 1 million pounds of food in each of the last 2 years, and we've already surpassed it this year. So it'll be our largest year yet, and that's not just to Second Harvest. Our customer base is growing, and I think it's a really positive outlook for where this could be going. Coming out of something that's been really, really difficult.
Thanks, Scott. Michelle?
There's a quote that you can't steer it if it's not moving. And we definitely were moving during the pandemic, and we decided to steer it to the direction we wanted it to go. And we showed, we had the opportunity and to show that it's not impossible to work with a lot of different farmers. It's not impossible to build out over a few years the infrastructure and the resources we need to continue a program like this. It's not impossible to show that it's worth paying farmers what the food is worth, what they deserve for putting in the work, and and folks, everybody in our community deserves good food, and we are able to make that happen. We are so committed to this program and what we've shown we can do with it that we're committing our own resources to this as well. So the program doesn't operate solely on this funding. We believe in it so much. We've shown how important it is that we are putting our own resources into it as well. The resources that we've been able to get and that that look to be on the horizon, if everything passes, that allows us to do it at a scale that continues that reliability for our partner agencies and folks all throughout Dane County. And that's just something I'm really excited about. It wasn't an overnight thing. Like it takes a few years to get to scale and to do this. And now we're there, and now we're ready to keep going with it. And I'm really excited, and that we've been able to show how successful this can be, and that and it's unfortunately a pretty unique program. And I'm hoping that other folks see what we've done and ask us how to do it, because it's something that other folks can do with effort, but and support and resources. But I'm really proud of what we've done.
Yeah, as you should be. I mean, I listened to the two of you, and it's obvious that feeding people feeds your souls, and really what you do is a passion, but it's an act of service too. And it's one of the reasons I feel so fortunate to live in this community, and I thank you for that. I'm just curious, before we wrap up, or as we're wrapping up, I'm wondering from each of you if you'd be comfortable sharing a little bit about kind of what is the past few years, and this could be a whole episode really, but kind of in general, how has that past few years impacted you personally? What has this experience been like for you? Kind of hard to put into words, but if either of you have anything to share, I think it would be interesting, just a little insight for people.
It's been unusual. A lot of my life, as a farmer has been a little bit solitary anyways. And so in some ways the isolation wasn't the hardest part for me. It was a little challenging for my kids for sure. They missed the interaction, with friends and stuff. And we try to get creative with new games and things like that. It has definitely shown me how, and I've always known this, but how interconnected we all are. Mm-hmm. And I'm just so grateful to all the new people I've met, and the relationships that have gotten stronger over the past couple of years. And so on a personal level, it's certainly been challenging, but I really feel like I've grown, and I still just love the work I'm doing. And this gives me a place to do more of it. I'm really fortunate that way, I know. but it's important work, and I'm really lucky to be doing it.
Thanks, Scott. We're lucky you're doing it. That's for sure. Michelle, how about you? Any thoughts? Again, pretty big question.
Second Harvest Food Bank of Southern Wisconsin is the third food bank I've worked at. I was at a food bank in Ann Arbor and one in Boulder, and I've been doing this since 2001. This is apparently the career I've chosen. It's something that I really believe strongly in, and I had started this position in like 6 months before the pandemic, like 5 or 6 months. And folks are like, whoa, you picked a really, really tough time to come into this. I'm like, I would have been at a food bank somewhere, somewhere in the country. I chose to come to Madison because there's 200 Feeding America food banks. And when the food bank in Madison, when my predecessor Dan announced his retirement, I noticed that. I thought that's one of the food banks that I would move for, and I applied for the job, and luckily it all worked out, and I got the job. And I really I didn't get to explore the community as much as I'd like to during the pandemic, but I got to meet, even if it was over Zoom, so many folks. I got to see how a community comes together. I got to see pandemic can bring out the best and the worst in folks, but I got to see so much the best of the community that I had chosen to call home. And despite the way it happened, it was one of the best ways to be introduced to a community that you could see the best in folks and how folks came together. And the pandemic was a pretty lonely time. But it was also a time where I got to see some really amazing things that restored my faith in humanity every day.
That's great. Well, thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Scott. Again, thank you both for making such a difference in people's lives and such a difference in our community. I hope you know how much you're both appreciated by the community. I do want to remind folks who are listening that despite the fact that, Dane County and others are putting a lot of resources into this partnership, there's still much more need. So please support your local growers. You won't be sorry. Support places like Second Harvest and your local food pantries. Unfortunately, the need is always there, and it's always great. So if you're able and you have anything you can share, please always feel free to do that. But again, Scott and Michelle, thank you. This was a really interesting kind of peek behind the curtain to just see how things work and see how things worked during the pandemic and continue to moving forward. But I think one of the things that's comforting to know is that we have faced such a tremendous challenge and come through it even stronger. And regardless of what's ahead, I hope this allows people to feel a little better and a little more secure about our future and our ability to come together and do what it takes to help one another during challenging times. So to the two of you, I wish you the best. Again, thanks for taking the time to come out here. To everyone else, thank you for taking a few minutes to listen to this edition of the Dane County Podcast. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks. Take care.